A girl lives between the silence of the luxurious house and the invisible weight of caring for her brother alone. One ordinary day, she calls her millionaire father and whispers, "My back hurts." When he arrives, he finds his daughter collapsed, exhausted, scrubbing a floor soaked with milk and tears. The image destroys him. What the man discovers is shocking. 8-year-old Emily Walker stood on her tiptoes, desperately trying to reach the cereal box on the top shelf. With her brother Jake crying in the background, she knew there wasn't much time before the pristine Chicago townhouse would echo with the sound of high heels against hardwood floors and the inevitable criticism that would follow. "Jake, please be quiet," she whispered, finally grabbing the box. Remember what Caroline said about noise in the morning? Caroline Hudson wasn't their mother. She had entered their lives 2 years after their mother's departure, bringing with her designer clothes, strict rules, and little patience for children. Emily's father, Robert Walker, a high-powered investment banker at Chicago's prestigious Lakeshore capital, spent most of his days hidden behind glass walls of downtown skyscrapers, negotiating million-dollar deals, while his daughter negotiated childhood on behalf of 2. The morning ritual was always the same. Emily woke first, at 6:30 a.m. to the alarm she had set herself. She would quietly slip out of bed, wash her face, brush her teeth with the precision of someone 3 times her age, and then wake 4-year-old Jake. She'd help him dress, making sure his shirt was tucked in the way Caroline liked it, that his hair was combed neatly to the side, and that his shoelaces were double-knotted so they wouldn't come undone during the day. "Your father pays good money for that private school," Caroline would often say. "The least you could do is look presentable." This Wednesday morning, as Emily poured milk over Jake's cereal, her small hands trembling slightly from fatigue, she noticed a red stain on her brother's collar. Panic washed over her. Yesterday, while she was helping Jake with his tomato soup, a drop had splashed. She'd tried to clean it with soap and water before bed, but the faint mark remained, a crimson flag that would signal her failure to Caroline. "We need to change your shirt," Emily said, glancing nervously at the kitchen clock. 20 minutes until Caroline's inspection. 15 minutes until their father left for work after his brief appearance for coffee. She rushed Jake upstairs, changed his shirt, and had just finished tucking it in when she heard the master bedroom door open. They made it back to the kitchen just as Robert walked in, his attention divided between his phone and his watch. "Morning, kids," he said absently, pouring coffee into his travel mug. He dropped a quick kiss on each of their heads. "Study hard today." Emily opened her mouth, wanting to tell him about her science project that had received an A, or how Jake had learned to write his name yesterday, or how her back had been hurting from carrying Jake up the stairs when he fell asleep on the couch last night. But Robert was already walking toward the door. Phone pressed against his ear. "Robert," Caroline's voice cut through the kitchen as she entered, perfectly dressed in a navy pencil skirt and white blouse. "Don't forget dinner with the Prestons tonight." "Got it." "Reservation at 7, he replied, his hand on the doorknob, and then he was gone, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and the hollow promise of his presence later that evening, a promise Emily had learned not to count on. "Emily," Caroline said, inspecting the kitchen counter where a few drops of milk had spilled, "clean this up before you leave, and make sure Jake doesn't get his new clothes dirty today. The nanny will pick you both up from school." Emily nodded, already reaching for a paper towel. She knew the nanny, Mrs. Peterson, would be late again. She always was on Wednesdays, because Caroline scheduled her salon appointments, knowing they conflicted with school pickup. It meant Emily and Jake would wait in the school office, Emily doing her homework, while keeping Jake entertained with the few crayons and paper she kept in her backpack, specifically for these occasions. As Caroline clicked her way out of the kitchen to gather her designer handbag and car keys, Emily quickly wiped the counter, helped Jake finish his cereal, and packed their lunches, peanut butter sandwiches with the crusts cut off for Jake, just a plain sandwich for herself. There wasn't much time for her to eat breakfast anymore. Making sure Jake was ready had become the priority. Her teacher, Miss Coleman, had noticed Emily's increasing fatigue, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she sometimes dozed off during quiet reading time, how she kept checking the classroom clock as dismissal approached, worried about being first in line to pick up Jake from his pre-K classroom before heading to the office to wait. "Emily, is everything okay at home?" Ms. Coleman had asked yesterday. Yes. Everything's fine, Emily had answered, with the practiced smile of a child who had learned that adults preferred simple answers that didn't disrupt their own busy lives. But everything wasn't fine. Emily's small shoulders carried the weight of responsibilities no child should bear, and each day that weight grew heavier. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after Emily's science project victory that no one had acknowledged. That morning, the microwave had exploded with milk when Emily tried to warm it for Jake's cereal. She'd cleaned it frantically, heart pounding with each wipe, terrified that Caroline would discover the mess. Later, after Caroline and her father had left, Emily realized she'd forgotten to pack Jake's favorite stuffed dinosaur for his show and tell. His disappointed face had haunted her through math class. By afternoon, rain pounded against the windows of Chicago's prestigious Lakefront Academy. Emily sat in her third-grade classroom, her pencil moving mechanically across her spelling worksheet as Ms. Coleman circulated among the students. "Emily?" Ms. Coleman's voice was soft as she crouched beside Emily's desk. "You fell asleep again during reading time." Emily blinked rapidly, shame coloring her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Ms. Coleman. I'm not upset, sweetheart. I'm worried." Ms. Coleman's eyes were kind behind her glasses. "I sent a note home last week." "Did your parents see it?" Emily swallowed hard. The note had never made it past her backpack. She'd hidden it beneath her spelling workbook, afraid of Caroline's reaction. "They're very busy," she replied. Ms. Coleman sighed, placing a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "I'd like to talk with them." "Everyone gets tired sometimes, but you're exhausted nearly every day." The bell rang before Emily could respond. She gathered her things quickly, rushing to pick up Jake from the pre-K building. Rain soaked through her light jacket as she crossed the courtyard, but she didn't notice. Her only thought was getting to Jake before he became anxious, waiting alone. Mrs. Peterson was late again. Emily and Jake sat in the main office, watching as other children were collected by parents or nannies who arrived on time. Jake's shoes were muddy from jumping in puddles during recess, and Emily desperately tried to clean them with a tissue from the receptionist's desk. "It's okay." "Emmy," Jake whispered, using his nickname for her. "Caroline won't see," but Emily knew better. Caroline noticed everything, especially when it came to potential messes in her immaculate home. Last weekend, when Jake had accidentally spilled juice on the living room rug, Caroline's eyes had narrowed dangerously. "Your father works 18-hour days to provide this beautiful home," she'd said. "Is this how you show gratitude?" Mrs. Peterson finally arrived, an hour late and flustered. Traffic was terrible because of the rain, she explained as they hurried to her car. At home, Mrs. Peterson left promptly at 6 gowns, despite Caroline's text saying she'd be late. Emily prepared Jake's dinner, chicken nuggets she carefully heated in the oven, and set the table with paper napkins folded into triangles the way Caroline preferred. As Jake ate, Emily heard her father's key in the door, an unusual sound at this hour. Her heart lifted. Perhaps he'd remembered about the dinner with the Prestons and come home early to change. "Dad!" Jake called out excitedly, dropping his fork. Robert Walker appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his suit but with his tie loosened. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Hey, buddy," he said, ruffling Jake's hair. "Where's Caroline?" "She's not home yet," Emily answered, wiping Jake's face with a napkin. "She said something about a charity committee meeting before dinner." Robert checked his watch and frowned. "Right, the Preston dinner." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages. "She's probably on her way. I need to change quickly." Emily nodded, used to the choreography of adults moving around each other without actually connecting. She continued cleaning up Jake's dinner mess while her father disappeared upstairs. Later, after both Caroline and Robert had left for their dinner, Caroline barely acknowledging, the children with a distracted behave for Mrs. Peterson, though the nanny had already gone. Emily found herself alone with Jake again. She supervised his bath, helped him brush his teeth, and read him a story from the book she'd borrowed from the school library. "Emmy," Jake murmured as she tucked him into bed, "why doesn't Caroline like us?" The question stabbed at Emily's heart. "She does," she lied. "She's just very busy. Like Daddy?" "Like Daddy," Emily agreed, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. After Jake fell asleep, Emily tackled her homework, fighting to keep her eyes open. At some point, she must have dozed off because she awakened to the sound of Jake crying in the darkness. She rushed to his room to find he'd wet the bed, something that had been happening more frequently lately. "I'm sorry, Emmy," he sobbed. "Don't tell Caroline. She'll be mad." "Shh, it's okay," Emily soothed, helping him change into clean pajamas. "It was an accident. I'll fix it." She stripped the bed, bundled the wet sheets, and carried them to the laundry room. Standing on a stool to reach the washing machine controls, Emily lost her balance. The stool tipped and she fell backward, pain shooting through her back as she hit the tile floor. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. When she finally managed to sit up, her back throbbed with a sharp, persistent ache. Jake stood in the doorway, eyes wide with fear. "Emmy? Are you okay?" Emily forced a smile through her tears. "I'm fine," Jake just slipped. But as she tried to stand, the pain intensified, radiating from her lower back up to her shoulders. That night, they slept together on the living room couch, Emily afraid to climb the stairs back to her room. She held Jake close, her arms wrapped protectively around him, despite the pain it caused her. Robert Walker sat at the head of the conference table on the 40th floor of Lakeshore Capital's gleaming glass tower. Rain streamed down the floor-to-ceiling windows, providing a dramatic backdrop to what should have been his career-defining moment. After 3 years of relentless work, the Anderson merger was finally happening. The clients were satisfied, the paperwork was ready, and his promotion to senior partner was all but guaranteed. "As you can see from the projections," Robert continued his presentation, gesturing to the screen behind him, "the fourth quarter earnings will exceed initial estimates by—" His phone vibrated in his pocket. He ignored it. This was too important. It vibrated again, then again. Something uncomfortable stirred in his chest, an unfamiliar feeling of dread that made it difficult to concentrate on the numbers in front of him. "Excuse me," he said finally, stepping away from the table. "I need to take this." In the hallway, he glanced at his phone. 3 missed calls from home. Not from Caroline. Her number would have appeared with her name. These calls came from the home landline, which almost nobody used. A cold sense of foreboding washed over him as he dialed back. After 2 rings, a small, strained voice answered. "Dad?" Emily's voice sounded different, tight with pain. "Emily? What's wrong? Where's Caroline?" The questions tumbled out as Robert pressed the phone harder against his ear, trying to hear over the pounding rain outside. "My back hurts," Emily whispered. I can't carry Jake anymore." There was a thud, a short cry, and then silence. "Emily?" Robert's voice rose in panic. "Emily?" No response. Without a word to his colleagues, Robert grabbed his coat and ran for the elevator. The 20-minute drive home through Chicago's rain-soaked streets felt like an eternity. He tried calling the house repeatedly, but no one answered. His mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. When he finally pulled into the driveway of their elegant brownstone, he noticed the front door was slightly ajar. Inside, water had pooled on the hardwood floor of the entryway, rain blown in through the open door. "Emily?" "Jake!" he called out, his voice echoing through the quiet house. He found them in the kitchen. Emily was on her knees on the wet floor, trying to clean up spilled milk and broken glass while Jake clung to her neck, his small arms wrapped tightly around her, as if he were drowning and she was his only lifeline. Emily's face was pale, tears streaming down her cheeks as she struggled to both comfort her brother and clean the mess with trembling hands. "Emily," Robert breathed, rushing forward. She looked up at him with exhausted eyes that seemed to belong to someone much older. "I'm sorry about the mess," she whispered. "I tried to make lunch, but—" "Stop," Robert said, gently taking Jake from her and helping Emily to her feet. She winced in pain. "What happened to your back?" "I fell yesterday," she admitted, "from the stool in the laundry room. Jake had an accident and I was trying to wash the sheets before—" She stopped suddenly, as if realizing she'd said too much. "Before what, Emily?" She looked down. "Before Caroline found out." Something inside Robert broke. He looked at his children, really looked at them, perhaps for the first time in years. Jake's too small shirt that Emily had clearly struggled to button. Emily's mismatched socks, one damp from cleaning the floor. The exhaustion etched into his daughter's young face, the fear in his son's eyes. "And where is Caroline?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Emily hesitated. She had a spa appointment. She said Mrs. Peterson would be here by noon, but she texted to say she's sick today. Robert checked his watch. It was 1:30 p.m. Let's get you both to the hospital, he said, lifting Jake into his arms and guiding Emily toward the door. In the emergency room of Northwestern Memorial, Robert sat with Jake on his lap while doctors examined Emily. His phone buzzed continuously with messages from the office, from clients, from his assistant, all wondering where he'd disappeared to in the middle of the most important meeting of the year. He silenced it without replying. The doctor, a kind-eyed woman named Dr. Bennett, emerged from the examination room and motioned for Robert to follow her. "Your daughter has a mild back sprain," she explained. "It's not serious, but it is concerning given her age. This kind of injury is typically seen in adults who lift heavy objects repeatedly." Robert felt sick. "She's been carrying her brother." Dr. Bennett's expression remained neutral, professional. "She mentioned that. She also shows signs of chronic fatigue, minor nutritional deficiencies and stress. Mr. Walker, is there adequate adult supervision at home?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Of course there was adequate supervision. They had a nanny. Caroline was home in the evenings. He came home every night, late, but he was there, wasn't he? He stammered, suddenly unable to remember the last time he'd been home for dinner on a weeknight, or the last time he'd helped with homework or bath time, or bedtime stories. Dr. Bennett's voice softened. "Your daughter is exhibiting signs of what we sometimes call parentification, when a child takes on responsibilities typically handled by adults. It's quite common in households where parents work long hours, or where there's a single parent stretched too thin." "But we have help," Robert insisted weakly. "The nanny and my wife—" He stopped, correcting himself. "My partner, Caroline." "Mr. Walker," Dr. Bennett said gently, "when I asked Emily who takes care of her when she's sick, do you know what she said? She said she takes care of herself, and then she makes sure Jake is okay." Something shifted in Robert's understanding of his home life, a seismic realignment of what he thought was happening and what was actually occurring behind the pristine walls of their townhouse while he pursued success in glass towers. The house was quiet when they returned from the hospital. Emily rested on the living room couch with strict instructions not to lift anything, especially not her brother, for at least a week. Jake sat next to her, unusually subdued, coloring quietly in the book Robert had purchased from the hospital gift shop. "Are you hungry?" Robert asked, realizing he had no idea what his children usually ate for dinner. Emily started to rise. "I can make—" "No," Robert said firmly, gently guiding her back down. "I'm asking what you'd like to eat. I'll make it." Emily and Jake exchanged a look of surprise. "You can cook?" Jake asked with the brutal honesty of a 4-year-old. The question stung. "I can learn," Robert replied, forcing a smile. "How about pizza?" "We could order in." The children's faces lit up, making Robert wonder how rarely such a simple pleasure was allowed in their regimented lives. While they ate pizza directly from the box, something he suspected Caroline would never permit, Robert listened. Really listened. Emily talked about her science project, about Jake learning to write his name, about the class hamster she helped care for during lunch periods. Jake showed off his dinosaur knowledge, naming species Robert had never heard of. As the evening progressed, Robert found himself laughing for what felt like the first time in years. The weight of the abandoned Anderson merger seemed insignificant compared to the sound of his children's voices. After tucking them into bed, Jake insisted on staying with Emily to protect her. Robert went to his home office and opened his laptop. He accessed the home security system he'd installed, but rarely checked. The cameras covered most of the common areas, primarily for security when they traveled. Now, with growing unease, he scrolled back through recent footage. What he saw shattered the carefully constructed illusion of his family life. Emily, struggling to reach the high shelves in the kitchen using a wobbling chair. Emily, cleaning up Jake's spilled juice while nervously checking the clock. Emily, helping Jake with bath time, standing on a stool to test the water temperature. Emily, falling asleep over her homework at the kitchen table. Caroline appeared in some footage, but rarely interacting with the children. She moved through the house like a beautiful ghost, checking her reflection in mirrors, talking on her phone, sometimes issuing sharp corrections about crumbs on the counter or shoes left in the entryway. Mrs. Peterson, their supposedly full-time nanny, was visibly absent during hours she was paid to be present. On days she did appear, she often spent more time on her phone than engaging with the children. Then Robert found footage from yesterday, the day before Emily's call. He watched in horror as his 8-year-old daughter climbed onto the laundry room stool, lost her balance, and fell hard onto the tile floor. He saw her lie there for long moments, clearly in pain, before dragging herself up and continuing to load the washing machine, all while Caroline was nowhere to be seen. The timestamp on the video showed 9:47 p.m., a time when both children should have been asleep, when Caroline should have been home from her charity meeting. With shaking hands, Robert checked his credit card statements online. The truth revealed itself in cold digital clarity: no charity meeting. Instead, a charge at Bellissima Spa at 4:30 p.m., followed by dinner at Marcello's at 8 p.m., neither establishment anywhere near the Preston restaurant where he'd met Caroline at 7th car. He dug deeper. Spa appointments during school pickup times, lunch charges on days when Emily mentioned Caroline was supposedly at volunteer meetings, clothing purchases that exceeded monthly mortgage payments, and most damning of all, recurring charges at the River North Hotel, a place Robert knew well. It was where his firm put up out-of-town clients. But Caroline wasn't meeting clients. A cold realization settled over him as he cross-referenced dates and times. The hotel charges aligned perfectly with occasions when Caroline claimed to be visiting her sister in Milwaukee, a sister who, now that Robert thought about it, he'd never actually met. The Anderson merger documents lay forgotten on his desk as Robert continued his investigation. He found emails between Caroline and Mrs. Peterson, instructing the nanny to leave early on specific days. Claiming Robert had approved the schedule change, he hadn't, and assuring her she'd still be paid for full days. Then he found the school emails, dozens of them, sent to both his and Caroline's accounts. Notes from Ms. Coleman expressing concern about Emily's fatigue. Invitations to parent-teacher conferences that had gone unanswered. A recent email with the subject line, "Urgent Emily's academic performance declining," that had been marked as read but never mentioned to him. At 2 a.m., Robert heard the front door open. He remained seated in his darkened office as Caroline's heels clicked across the marble entryway. From his position, he could see her reflection in the hallway mirror as she reapplied lipstick that should have faded hours ago during their supposed dinner with the Prestons. He waited until she reached the bottom of the stairs before speaking. "Where were you today when Emily called?" His voice was quiet but carried clearly through the silent house. Caroline froze, then slowly turned. She recovered quickly, her expression shifting from surprise to practiced concern. "Robert, why are you sitting in the dark? Did something happen?" "Emily fell yesterday. Hurt her back." Today she collapsed trying to make lunch for Jake. "Where were you?" Caroline's hand fluttered to her throat, a theatrical gesture he'd once found charming. "I had that charity meeting, remember?" "And then the Prestons—" "There was no charity meeting," Robert said flatly. "And we both know the dinner with the Prestons was just you and me. You were at Bellissima Spa while our daughter was trying to clean wet sheets because Jake had an accident, and she was afraid you'd be angry." The beautiful mask slipped for just a moment before Caroline composed herself. "You're tracking my spending now. Checking up on me. That's beneath you, Robert." "What's beneath me," he replied, standing slowly, "is that I've allowed my children to become strangers while I chased promotions and deals. What's beneath me is that I trusted you to care for them." "Do you even like children?" Robert asked, spreading the credit card statements across his desk. "Or was this always about the lifestyle?" Caroline's perfectly composed face hardened. "They're not my children, Robert. I never signed up to be a mother." "You signed up to be my partner," he countered. "You moved into our home. You agreed—" "I agreed to be your companion," she interrupted. "To attend your corporate events, to host your business dinners, to look good on your arm. Not to raise another woman's children." The casual cruelty of her words struck him like a physical blow. "Emily and Jake are part of me," he said quietly. "The best part," Caroline laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. "You barely know them. When was the last time you attended a school event or took them to the park?" You've been just as absent as I have, Robert. You just paid other people to do the job and convinced yourself that was enough. Her words cut because they contained truth. He had been absent, consumed by his career, telling himself his sacrifices were for them, that providing financial security was enough. You're right, he admitted. I failed them. But that changes now. Caroline's expression shifted, calculation replacing defensiveness. Let's not overreact. The girl is fine, just a little dramatic. We'll hire a better nanny, perhaps a live-in this time. I'll adjust my schedule. Things will improve. Robert shook his head. No, Caroline. Things won't improve because this arrangement is over. I want you out of this house by tomorrow evening. You can't be serious. Her voice rose, indignation replacing the smooth charm she typically employed. After everything I've done for you, for your image, your career, your partner's wives love me. Your clients respect you more because of me. And my children fear you, Robert replied. That's unacceptable. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Robert turned to find Emily standing at the top of the stairs. Her small face solemn in the dim light. Emily, you should be in bed, he said gently. I heard voices, she explained, descending the stairs carefully, one hand on the banister. Is everything okay? Caroline smoothed her skirt, instantly transforming back into the polished, controlled woman she presented to the world. Everything's fine, Emily. Adult conversation, nothing for you to worry about. Go back to bed. Emily hesitated, looking at Robert. For the first time, he recognized the question in her eyes, the silent plea for protection she'd been sending him for years that he'd been too blind to see. Actually, Robert said, I'd like to talk with Emily. Caroline, I think we're done here. Caroline's eyes flashed with cold fury before she turned and ascended the stairs, heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. Robert guided Emily to the kitchen, where they sat at the breakfast counter, he'd rarely seen in daylight. He poured her a glass of milk, and after a moment's consideration, one for himself as well. I saw the videos, he said softly. From the security cameras. I saw how you take care of Jake, how you clean and cook and everything else. Emily stared at her glass. Are you mad? The question broke his heart. No, sweetheart. I'm proud of how strong and responsible you are. But I'm also very sorry that you've had to be so grown up. Her lower lip trembled. Ms. Coleman says I fall asleep in class sometimes. I know. I found her emails. Are you mad about that? Robert reached across the counter and took her small hand in his. The only person I'm mad at is myself, for not seeing what was happening. That changes now, Emily, I promise. The next morning, Robert made 3 phone calls. The first was to his firm, requesting an immediate 3-month family leave of absence. The second was to Emily and Jake's school, scheduling a meeting with their teachers. The third was to a real estate agent, asking her to find Caroline a suitable apartment. By evening, Caroline was gone, leaving behind expensive perfume bottles and a house that suddenly seemed to have more air. Jake asked once where she'd gone, then seemed to forget about her entirely, delighted instead by his father's clumsy attempts at making pancakes for dinner. The following weeks brought transformation. Robert learned to cook basic meals, established bedtime routines, and discovered the simple joy of helping with homework. He attended his first parent-teacher conference, where Ms. Coleman's relief was palpable. Emily seems like a different child, she told him. She's more focused, more engaged. She smiles more. On his way out of the conference, Robert noticed a flyer for the school's family support program, a resource for single parents and families in transition. An idea began to form. 1 month into his leave of absence, Robert visited his firm not to discuss work, but to propose a foundation, one that would identify and support children in situations like Emily's, where they carried adult responsibilities on small shoulders. He secured initial funding from partners who, seeing his passion, couldn't refuse. The Chicago Children's Burden Relief Foundation launched 6 months later, partnering with schools to identify overburdened children and provide their families with resources, counseling, household help, after-school programs, and parental support. Emily's drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow became their logo, appearing on websites and brochures across the city. 10 years passed. The foundation grew, establishing centers in neighborhoods throughout Chicago and eventually expanding to other cities. Robert never returned to investment banking, finding greater satisfaction in leading the organization he'd created. He dated occasionally but remained unmarried, prioritizing his role as a father above all else. Emily, now 18, graduated high school as valedictorian, accepted to Northwestern University's pre-med program, with plans to become a pediatrician. Jake, 14 and tall for his age, showed remarkable talent in graphic design, creating digital animations that told stories of children. Overcoming challenges. On the evening after Emily's graduation, they sat together on the back deck of the modest but comfortable home they'd moved to years ago, trading memories as the sun set over Lake Michigan in the distance. "Do you remember when you called me that day?" Robert asked. "About your back hurting?" Emily nodded. "I was so scared. I thought you'd be angry about the spilled milk." "I'm glad you called," Robert said. "That call saved all of us." Jake, sprawled in a deck chair with his ever-present sketchpad, looked up. "Dad, is it weird that I barely remember Caroline?" "Sometimes I think I made her up." Robert exchanged a glance with Emily. "You were very young, and she wasn't really present even when she was there." "I remember being afraid a lot," Jake admitted. "Not of anything specific, just afraid of doing something wrong." Emily reached over to squeeze her brother's hand. "I was afraid too, but not anymore." As darkness fell, Robert watched his children, no longer children really, and marveled at their resilience. The burdens that had once threatened to crush Emily's spirit had instead forged in her a remarkable compassion. Jake, once clingy and fearful, had grown into a confident young man whose art gave voice to children still struggling. And Robert himself had found purpose not in closing deals or climbing corporate ladders, but in ensuring other children wouldn't have to carry weights too heavy for small shoulders. "You know," he said softly as stars appeared above them, "sometimes the heaviest storms bring the clearest skies afterward." Emily smiled. "And sometimes a call for help is really a call to change."